Hello and welcome everyone to yet another tech enthusiastic video from Edureka. I am Ravi and today I'll be teaching you the Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio is one of the most powerful IDE that works with all major programming languages like C Sharp, Python, and Java versions. It is maintained by Microsoft Corporation, and this IDE is loaded with rich features and functionalities that one can possibly imagine. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through some of its important capabilities. Firstly, we shall discuss the agenda and the topics which are discussed in this particular tutorial. They are: what is Visual Studio, features of Visual Studio, why should you choose Visual Studio, install Visual Studio, basic operations, command line palette, file encoding, additional command line arguments, shortcuts in Visual Studio, and finally, we shall wind up the session with a calculator application using C Sharp in Visual Studio. Now, without wasting much time, let us quickly begin with our first topic. What is Visual Studio? So Visual Studio is an advanced integrated development enterprise exclusively developed by the Microsoft Corporation in the year 2000. It is actively used to develop computer programs, websites, desktop applications, mobile applications, and much more. Visual Studio is capable enough to support more than 36 programming languages that allows the code editor and compiler to execute nearly any programming language. Some popular programming languages that are supported by Visual Studio are Visual Basics, C programming language, C++ programming language, C Sharp programming language, Python, Java, JavaScript, and many more. Moving ahead, we shall discuss the important features of Visual Studio. So firstly, code editor, debugger, designer, other tools, and extensibility. Now we shall discuss each one of them in detail. Firstly, the code editor. The Visual Studio has the best-in-class code editor which supports multiple functionalities. It enables bookmarks in code to incorporate quick navigation. In addition to the normal text, Visual Studio also provides incremental search, regex search, multi-item clipboard, and task list. The code editor is capable to support code refactoring, parameter reordering, variable and method renaming, interface extraction, and many more user-friendly functionalities. Followed by that, we have the debugger. The remarkable debugger of the Microsoft Visual Studio can work both as a machine-level debugger as well as a source-level debugger. It is capable to debug mapped code as well as a native code. It is capable to compile any programming language that supports Visual Studio. It is capable to attach itself to the currently running process to conduct monitoring and debugging procedures on the code, provided if the source code is available. Visual Studio can incorporate memory dumps and multi-threading as well. Now, the next feature is the designer. Visual Studio includes a number of visual designers to help within the development of the applications. Some of the tools are WPF Designer, where the WPS authorizes user interfaces for Windows Presentation Foundations. Followed by that, we have Windows Forms Designer. So the Windows Forms Designer creates graphical user interface applications for Windows Forms. Then we have Class Designer. The Class Designer authorizes and edits the classes, including its members and their access using UML modeling. Followed by that, we have the Web Designer. The Visual Studio additionally includes Website Editor and Designer that permits websites to be authorized by dragging and dropping widgets. Next, we have Mapping Designer. The Mapping Designer is employed by LINQ SQL to design mapping between information schemas and therefore the classes that encapsulate the data. Finally, we have the Data Designer. The Data Designer is used to graphically edit information schemas as well as written tables, primary and foreign keys and constraints. Followed by that, the next feature is the Other Tools. So the Visual Studio provides multiple number of tools, and few of the important tools are OpenTabs browser. The OpenTabs browser is used to edit the properties in the GUI in VS. Followed by that, the Server Explorer. Server Explorer manages database connections on a computer. Then we have the Object Browser, which is used to browse the namespace in managed assemblies. The Team Explorer integrates the Azure DevOps to the Visual Studio IDE. Then we have the Data Explorer, which manages Microsoft SQL databases and instances. and Solution Explorer, which manages the browsers in the files in a solution. The last but not the least feature is the extensibility. Visual Studio permits developers to write down extensions for Visual Studio to extend its capabilities. These extensions plug into Visual Studio and extend its functionality. Extensions are available in the form of macros, add-ins, and packages. So these were the few important features of Visual Studio. And moving ahead, we shall understand why exactly you need to choose Visual Studio. So the main reason why the Visual Studio became the most popular IDE are it's lightweight, it is fast, it's open source, and it supports cross-platform, and finally it's extensible. It has everything that a programmer expects from any code editor with some additional and useful features. Now moving ahead, we shall learn how to install Visual Studio. I will explain you to install Visual Studio in a step-by-step process. Firstly, we need to download Visual Studio and select the package you need, and followed by that, you need to select the environment for which you're coding, and finally, you're ready to create your own first project. So firstly, let us download Visual Studio. Just Google download Visual Studio and the first link will pop up your installer. So this is the home page of Microsoft Visual Studio 2019. You might want to select either community or professional one. So we shall go to the community version. You can see that the Visual Studio downloader has been successfully downloaded. Now let's run this file to download our actual Visual Studio editor. Double click on it and your package will be unpacked. Select Continue and you can see your Visual Studio installer is running now. You can see that the Visual Studio editor is being downloaded successfully. Now it is asking you to select one of the packages. So here, as I've said, Visual Studio supports multiple programming languages, which are 36 plus. Now here, let us use C Sharp. So in order to select C Sharp, you might want to select the .NET Desktop Development package here. So we shall just pick the .NET Development Application package. Now we shall select the button Install. You can see that our package is getting downloaded. You can also see that I have checked in Start After Installation. So once after the package is installed, the editor will automatically start. You can see that the Visual Studio has been started successfully, and this dialog box here is asking to sign in. If you want to do it now, you can sign in, or either you can choose not now, maybe later. So now I'll be selecting here not now, maybe later. And in here, you can select the theme for your Visual Studio. I would prefer to go for dark. Now, just start your Visual Studio. You can see that a new dialog box has been opened now, and I have some previous projects from my system. Now, let us understand how to create a new project. To create a new project, you have to select Create New Project over here. Click on it, and you will enter a new dialog box where you can find Console App.NET Core, Class Library, MS Test, and many more options. You want to select the first one, which is Console App.NET Core, and inside that, you have C Sharp. Now click Next, and you'll find Configure Your Project. Configure Your Project is all about naming your project and saving a memory location for that particular project in your local system. Now, I would name my first project as Edureka 1, and the location will be the same as the default location what the Visual Studio chooses. Now, let us create this project. You can see that the Visual Studio has been successfully started, and we have a default program which is none other than the Hello World program on our text editor. Now, to save this particular code, you might want to select the icon Save, which is over here. And once after the code is saved, you might want to go to run the code, and this particular play button will help you run this particular code. Now let's execute this program and see the output. You can see that the Visual Studio is telling the build has been started. And here we have our terminal, which will produce our output. You can see the message has been printed here, which says Hello World. So this is how you basically create a project, write the code, save the code and execute in a Visual Studio. Now with this, let us move ahead and understand the next chapter in our Visual Studio tutorial. So in the next chapter, we have the basic operations. So what exactly are the basic operations related to Visual Studio? So some of the basic operations in a Visual Studio are creating a project, running the project, setting breakpoints, and executing an existing project. We have seen how to create a new project and execute it. Now let us understand how to set breakpoints in our project and how to execute an already existing project in our local system. Firstly, let us understand how to open an existing project. To open an existing project, you might want to select the icon Open, which is lying adjacent to the Save icon, which is here. Or you can either select File and select the Open option from there either. So now let's try to select the Open File option from here. So once you select that button, you'll find this new dialog box which pops up on your screen. From here, redirect to the location where your file is existing. So this particular file is my program. Now let's try to run this. You can see that I have opened an existing file in my program. So you can see the file has been successfully opened, and that particular file was based on a while loop. Now let us try to save this program. To save this program, we need to select the save icon, which is present in the toolbar. Our program has been saved. Now let us try to understand how to set breakpoints in the code. To set breakpoints, select your code and right click on the text editor, and you'll find a new dialog box wherein you can find to set breakpoints. So this particular option will insert a breakpoint into your code. And the next option is about inserting a trace point. So this is how you set breakpoint in your code. So now you can see this particular highlighted line is our breakpoint. You have now understood how to place breakpoints in your code. Let us understand how to run this particular code. To run this particular code, you just need to select the play button on the toolbar, which is highlighted with a green color. Once you play that, you see your code getting compiled and the output generated on the terminal. So here you can see your output. So this is how you execute an existing project in your local system and also to place breakpoints in your code. So followed by the basic operations, we have the next chapter as command line palette. So what exactly is a command line palette? The Microsoft Visual Studio Code is equally accessible from the keyboard. The foremost necessary key combination to grasp is to control Shift P that brings up the command line palette. From here, you have access to all the functionalities of Visual Studio. Together, keyboard shortcuts for four most common operations are to check for language mode, to check for close editor, close notification messages, close window, debug and configuration, and many more. So after that, the command line palette user interface provides access to several commands. You'll execute editor commands, open files, rummage around for symbols, see a fast define of a file, all exploitation and equivalent interactive window, and many more. So few of the tips have been displayed on the screen here. And now that you have understood about command line palette, let's move on to the next chapter, which deals with file encoding support from Visual Studio. So what exactly is file encoding? So file encoding can be set either globally or based on your workspace using your file.encoding settings in your user settings or workspace settings. So the file encoding support from Visual Studio will look something like this. You can view the file encoding in the status bar, which is highlighted in the blue color. Click on the encoding bar on the status bar to reopen or save the active file with a different encoding. You can see the option is being displayed on the screen, which is similar in the Visual Studio. Followed by that, you can choose your type of encoding. So here we have chosen UTF-8, which is a default encoding support in Visual Studio. Now, let us try to learn about additional command arguments in Visual Studio. So what exactly are additional command line arguments? So additional command line arguments in Visual Studio are special keywords which have special functionality. Now, let us understand few of those in Visual Studio. The table here will explain us few of the additional command line arguments supported in Visual Studio. Firstly, we have goto. When used in a file line column, opens a file at a specific line and optional column position. This argument is provided since some operating systems permit. Followed by that, we have new. Opens a new session in Visual Studio instead of restoring the previous session. Then we have R, which forces a file or folder in last active window. Followed by that, we have file, name of the file to open. If the file does not exist, it will be created as default. You can specify multiple files. Followed by that, you have file line column question mark. This particular argument comes handy with the name of a file to open at a specified line or optional column position. You can specify multiple files in this manner, but you must use the G argument once before you use file line column question mark specifier. And lastly, we have folder. Name of a folder to open. You can specify multiple folders here as well. So followed by the command line arguments, we have shortcuts in Visual Studio. So the shortcuts available in Visual Studio are Alt plus Enter, which will give you Show Action List. Followed by that, you have Control Shift V, which will give you Paste from Clipboard. And similarly, many other shortcuts such as to move code from up, down, left, and right, you have Control Shift Alt up, down, left, right, and Extend Selection. This particular shortkey is very important, which will add in extensions to your Visual Studio. The shortkey for that will be Control plus W. And another one is Shrink Selection, which will give you the keyword as Control Shift plus W. Then you have Duplicate Current Line as Control D, and you can also add in some commands such as line command and block command using Control / and Control Shift / respectively. To run your configuration, you can select Control Shift Alt R, and to run build configuration for your file, you can press Control Shift F5. To debug, you can select Alt plus F5. So these were the shortcuts for Visual Studio. Now let's enter our last section, which is about creating a calculator application using C# in Visual Studio. So this is the code for creating a calculator application in Visual Studio. Here we have used switch case, and the operations which the calculator will be performing are completely basic, which are add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Now let's try to execute this code and see the output. You can see that the build started and the output has been generated successfully. Now the terminal is asking us to enter one option, either to select add or subtract or multiply or divide. Let us select multiply as 3. So the choice is 3. Now let us enter the first value, 10, and the second value as 5. Now the answer is 50. Product of 10 and 5 is 50, and the output has been successfully generated. So this is how the calculator application works in Visual Studio. So with this, we come to an end of this Visual Studio tutorial. If you have any queries related to this session, then please feel free to write them in the comment section below, and we will respond to you as soon as possible. Till then, thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!